I think most of us were unprepared for what Andrew brought.
Hurricane Andrew caught our community off guard. You could hear, the sound. It sounded like a freight train, coming towards you.
And the sound sounded like a train going outside the house. I mean, it was like some alien being outside your house.
So here we are, just a half a block from the bay, and we found a dozen houses on this one street alone where people are not evacuating. One man just said to me, "What's the worst that could happen? I'll get wet."
And I want to talk to you folks because I know some of you people there. You're acting foolishly for the sake of being together. Go be together in the shelter. Come back tomorrow. If your house is there, it's still going to be fine. You're not going to be able to do any good.
In August of 1992, I was the fire chief of the city of Miami, and as such, I was the emergency manager of the city of Miami. And sure enough, we started looking at the storm and then called the National Hurricane Center and got their predictions of what was going to happen. And they thought it was going to be a quickly strengthening storm heading our way, and it made a beeline to the west, right at us.
Well, I'd been here for many years. I moved here in 1972. Been through a couple of hurricanes. I remember one specific, Hurricane David. And I'm thinking as a young, cocky, kid, thinking, oh my gosh, they made all this hype about hurricanes. And Hurricane David was a little bit of wind and a lot of rain. I'm thinking, this is a hurricane, we got nothing to worry about. We went through a tremendous amount of work. Anytime there's a hurricane warning, the zoo goes through a tremendous amount of work, locking up things, putting away all the signs, taking signs down, taking tarps down. It is incredibly labor intensive. And ironically, I remember thinking, as we're putting things away, all this work, I'm tired. After all, this storm better come. It's one of these things you think in hindsight, God, what were you thinking?
A couple days before Hurricane Andrew struck, we had just gotten the weather forecast, and it was coming across the Atlantic and headed towards, a little bit further north from here, towards the Palm Beach area. And I recall vividly, just like yesterday, we looked back and we said to everybody, we need to be prepared because it's coming.
As a department back then, we prepared for what we thought was to be expected. The difference now is we know how bad it could be.
I think that for the most part, everybody took everything kind of lightly. Our point of reference was, years without a storm, and so everybody kind of thought, well, maybe we got to protect our homes a little bit, and we should probably have some extra food, but I don't think anybody was counting on that type of devastation.
Bob, did you ever think this was going to happen?
No, and I always hoped it would not happen, but knew the day was going to come when it would.
My wife and I were asleep, as were our kids, as was the couple and their family in another bedroom, and I heard a very loud noise. I woke up, my wife was still asleep, and I went to determine where the noise came from. What I found out was that my roof had broken in my kids' room.
That hospital at that time typically had about 75 inpatients in the facility. By the time we closed the doors in those last moments before the storm hit, there were 400 patients.
I do remember during the shift contacting my parents around 1 o'clock in the morning in the height of the storm impacting their neighborhood. I called them up, and that was the last conversation I had with them, and they were trying to tell me that everything was okay. But I sensed something in my mother's voice that everything wasn't okay.
There was a certain point in the storm where the patients were in the rooms. The pressure on the windows got so extraordinary. The windows were bowing in 4 or 5 inches. I'd never seen anything like it. It looked like the windows had saran wrap on them and they were being pushed back and forth. At a certain point in the night, those windows started to explode. So you had patients in those rooms with glass flying and debris and suddenly went from a safe haven to a very dangerous place for a patient to be.
If you're in a home that does not have covered windows on every single window, know where that interior place is now, that if this thing starts really coming in where you are, and it's going to happen in Dade County and it may happen everywhere here, know where you're going to go. Am I hearing?
Yeah.
We can hear it now here outside.
And and all of a sudden, one of the plywood things popped off. And I remember a window popped, and all my ears popped. It was like you were going up a mountain or going up a plane. Your ears popped. The pressure changed so quickly. And I got nervous, and I realized, I remember taking the mattress of the bed, putting it up against the window, and moving an armoire up against that mattress, that the next morning, I could not move that armoire. It took 3 of us to move that armoire. So it showed me the adrenaline that was rushing.
What I know people were doing, including myself, praying, that indeed we were spared because of the kind of noises, that you would basically hear outside, glass breaking from, again, objects being, thrown through the air, roofs collapsing. So it was quite a hairy situation.
And I remember the rumbling and the sound, and you could hear the shingles peeling off the roof. It was like, drrr, 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 everything just peeling off the roof. I think, oh my God, this place is coming down. And then all of a sudden it got calm. And I panicked, and I'm thinking, I heard about the eye. We're in the eye. And I'm thinking, if we're in the eye, now the back end of this storm is coming, and that's supposed to be the worst part, the back end coming. I said, we're not going to make this. But then I was listening to the radio, and fortunately they said, no, it's over.
Devastation that I saw overseas was just as bad as what it would have compared to when Andrew struck. As we drove down, being from Homestead and being already stationed in Miami, we were the first unit to roll in. And as we started driving down and we got past Kendall and going to Cutler Ridge on the way to Homestead, it was just the magnitude of what we saw along the sides of the road was just absolutely incredible.
The only way I can describe what South Dade appeared to be would have to be some type of atomic bomb striking South Dade. And the catastrophe that occurred afterwards, the chaos, the destruction, where there was no trees left except for like palm trees because those didn't fall, but every other tree kind of fell. Neighborhoods wiped out completely. The Country Walk neighborhood wiped out completely.
We then were moved down to the Country Walk area where it was almost like ground zero. And that's where my unit operated for a number of days.
The next day, I called the area manager down in the South Dade area. His name was Lanny. I remember calling Lanny and saying, Lanny, can you describe to me what you've got? Describe to me what you're seeing. He goes, Manny, it's really bad. I go, Lanny, I know it's bad, but can you really tell me a little bit more? He goes, Manny, it's really, really bad. And I go, okay, Lanny, I understand it's bad. Let me see if you can help describe it. How many poles are down? What do you see around? He goes, Manny, every single pole is down.
We had to kind of wait for things to settle, and then my son and I, who was a teenager, we ventured out the front door, looked outside, and we could see clearly for about 5 or 10 miles when we could not before because of all the trees, but all the trees were gone. And we could see in the distance that things were really in a mess. Our neighborhood, there were things strewn in the streets were covered with power lines, everything. You imagine anything outside was not in its original position, so it was terrible.
We had to chain the door shut because they kept blowing open during the storm. So storm passes, morning comes, unchain the doors, walking through the hallways that are full of patients, open the door, and everybody that was supposed to come to work was standing outside. Some of them were, they were dirty, they were in some cases injured themselves, but every person that was supposed to report to work came to work. It was an incredible moment. I will never get over it.
The initial, I guess, impulse was shock. Had to see the devastation that existed.
And so you started to seeing the roofs being blown off. Then you saw where it used to be trailer parks, and all you could see was pink insulation. The trailers were gone.
And to think, about the awesomeness of what was going to have to happen in the future in order to try to, get the community back together. That, in my opinion, then turned into a determination to rebuild the community.
There was a big sense of community. You all kind of, hung out together, and you also, helped each other.
We got letters and donations from every state in the country, from countries around the world. It just snowballed. People coming to us, giving us things left and right. And I couldn't believe I was opening these envelopes, checks for $10, checks for $1,000. It was amazing what people did to come help us in the zoo. But then what happened was I got a check from Homestead. And I remember looking at the return address thinking, Homestead? Why would someone from Homestead send us a check? Because Homestead was obliterated. And I opened this letter, and there's a check in there for several hundreds of dollars. And the letter said, please accept this donation in memory of my daughter, Naomi Browning, who was killed in the storm. And I remember it rocked me to my core. I couldn't cash that check. I had to contact her. I called, and I got a hold of her, and I said, Mrs. Browning, why did you send a check to the zoo? I mean, you have suffered the greatest loss any human being can suffer, the loss of a child. And I remember through her broken down voice, she said, Ron, you know, Naomi was with me on the bed in our house in Homestead with the wind blowing. And I remember the name Naomi Browning because she was a volunteer here. This is a 12-year-old girl that volunteered at the zoo. And her mother said, one of the last things she said to her before this beam came through the wall and killed her was, Mom, I'm so worried about the animals at the zoo. And that's one of those things that really sticks with you when you realize that this place had an effect on people, and the animals that were here affected people. I will never forget that, and that's why when you go by the tiger exhibit now, which was a favorite exhibit, you'll see a sign out there that says this is the Naomi Browning exhibit.
There is light at the end of the tunnel. There is hope. You will rebuild. It will be better than it was before, but you have to give it time, you know. And I can remember back during Andrew thinking, this is never going to end. You know, these shifts are never going to end. These calls are never going to end. These people aren't going to get their homes restored. And so it takes time, but it all paid off.
Florida Power and Light was so critical to the needs of the people, to be able to bring and restore power back into the lives of people. It was so important.
And I was surprised how quickly power was restored where I lived in the South End. It made me feel more comfortable about going into work, knowing that my family was okay. And I think Florida Power and Light did a good job in bringing it back.
Part of our mission is to be available in a crisis. And so we think our buildings are much, much more equipped to handle that at this point. Our hurricane plans are much more rigorous.
So if you fast forward now, 25 years later, we've prepared to make our system stronger and smarter to be able to handle the impacts of these hurricanes.
Oh yeah, we're better prepared. We in Miami-Dade County passed an ordinance that said that every single gas station had to have emergency backup generator. We passed ordinances that say you need to have backup generators to open up your grocery store. You know, we will be completely overwhelmed by an event such as Andrew. We need people to be as self-sufficient as possible for 72 hours.
From every dark cloud, there's a silver lining. And while Hurricane Andrew was devastating and a terrible storm, it allowed the South-Dade area to rebuild, to become better than it was before.
Darkness falls every night, just like darkness fell over South-Dade and in Miami-Dade County overall. But with darkness always comes the sun in the morning, and you kind of have to look at this period of the restoration, the humanitarian efforts. It took a long time to restore South Florida, but the light did come up, the sun did come up at the end.